We'll start back up then, all right? I look around the room and I realized that probably not everybody in the room knows me or knows me well. My name is Shawneen. I'm right now the senior Druid of the Three Cranes Grove, the Arnott famed order of Druidry. I'm also the guild chief of the Naturalist Guild. And also our Grove Naturalist too. I tell you all that because the next part of our program is going to be about deepening your vision as a seer using the nature spirits of phenomena. We've had a very good discussion on how we can come to the fire, how we can share that fire, but a lot of that discussion had to do with what were the gods and that sort of thing that we would work with. This is going to be a little bit different take on that, how you can use the nature spirits in order to access that in a different way. So I've got a couple of questions up there front. Just how can we interact with the nature spirits, deepen our abilities? Well, the answer is that is to get out there in nature and do it. I'd like to say that I belong to an earth-based spirituality. I like to have a lot of earth in my earth-based spirituality. How might their lives, these nature spirits, inform our practice? We're going to take a look at several ways where we can do that here today. What would an informed nature-based practice look like? Again, we're going to take a couple of different aspects, how you can make that connection, how you can bring those things into your practice, how you can make that more complete, and how that can actually inform how your readings are going to play out. Just a brief background, because I realize that Om is sort of the red-haired stepchild of the divinatory tools. Not everybody knows about it. Can I get a hand? How many people actively practice the Om system of divination in the room? 1, 2, 3. So a little bit less than a third, perhaps. All right. What do we know about the Oms? Well, what we do know about the Oms is that in the 4th or 5th centuries AD, they were making stone stelae, and everything else that they were doing with them was of a biodegradable nature, and it's lost to us. They probably were carving them on wood, but all those things have perished.
Okay, you're just using Celtic words now. What is a stele?
A stele actually is a stone tablet, a monolith, a megalith. Think headstone.
Kind of like a rune stone, sort of.
Yeah, it wouldn't be like a rune stone. Only what we're seeing in the Celtic worldview is largely boundary markers, okay, or perhaps gravestones. A lot of them will name the name of someone. They say, you know, Seamus, son of somebody of the tribe of blah. Okay, and so that's what we're seeing in these markers, and many of them are on the boundaries between the tribes. But one of the things you have to keep in mind is that in the Om, this was probably a secret language. So these weren't billboards saying, "Hey, this is where this tribe's property starts." This was a sign that probably indicated, yeah, there's a boundary here, but it was probably more on the nature of this is how we are magically protecting this boundary and keeping this boundary safe or whole, or keeping that temenos complete. So it wasn't for every person, although some people could probably read it. Most of what we know, or think we know, is that they did not have this language as their normal writing language. This was a secret language that only the poets and the druids and the learned people would know and would understand. The common folks were speaking just, they didn't have a written signatory type of a language at this point in their history.
Would they have been good Latin if they did anything?
They did Latin, they did Greek, they did Old Irish, but they didn't have a written language. It was just pretty much a spoken language. The Celts did not believe that they should write down things of import, okay, because they were too sacred, too holy, too important, or perhaps they wanted a monopoly on this information. They wanted to be able to control its dissemination. So they didn't believe in writing these things down. So this language would have been a secret language, a language just known amongst the elect, amongst the priests or the poets. Okay. What we do know about it comes down to us from ethnographers in the Middle Ages, in the 1300s and 1400s, they began to write down to capture all this, what we think we knew they were doing, and writing it down in Latin, in Old Irish, on manuscripts. So they began to collect up all these Omens. Now, because of the way things have played out in our modern day, everybody sort of has naturally come to believe that the Omens, that must be all about trees. Well, that's probably not at all true. Although the words for theta, which is a single or a multiple Omens, or a thid, which is a singular one, does derive from the word tree. So we know that they were trying to communicate that letters were trees, okay? It's not true, or probably isn't true, that that's all they meant. There were hundreds of Omens, and they were basically lists of things that they felt were important, things that they needed to remember. And the way they were using, this memory trick they were using, was that all of these started with the letter or the sound that they have. So in other words, the letter L might be a tree, and it is in this case, Luish, which is the rowan tree, but it also might be the word for a bird, the word for a stone, the word for an activity, the word for a body of water, all of which they were trying to remember. They were desperately trying to remember these things so that they would, because they didn't have a language, be able to pass them on, be able to learn them. And the trick, the memory trick they were using was that it was alliteration. Everything started with the same letter, okay? So that's what I mean when I say these are things that start with the letter B. The first letter in our reckoning of the Omen language is B, or be, which means birch, but it also means, you know, the first letter for the bird of this language, the first letter for the agricultural tool in this language. All those were all the same letter, okay? There were hundreds of lists, but the one unifying thing was that these were things that they were trying to remember, okay? So why were they trying to remember? That's the part that we need to sort of sort out as modern day Reconstructionists or modern day pagans. Why were they trying to remember these things? What was important to them? Why did they need to know about a whole bunch of bodies of water? Well, they probably were trying to remember all the bodies of water that were important in the lore stories. The Lower Shannon is the one that starts with L. So why was the Lower Shannon important? You know, how did that play out in the myths? Okay? Mike, you brought up one. You said, how many people would you need to dance the Omens? And the answer actually is not hard. They had a way for doing that. So like the letter B or the letter L would be like this, as opposed to the letter D, which would be like this. So two people, one people to do it, and one person to see them signing across the room and giving this language would be the answer to that question. Not dozens of people, just one to do it, one to see it. It's kind of like American Sign Language, only they would use for the stem line either their arm, their shin, the bridge of their nose, and they would use fingers to say whether there was 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 lines across those lines. So they could actually communicate across the room, so to speak. They could text from here to there. People now text each other to send messages. They could do that from across the room if they knew the language. So the intelligentsia, the Druids, they had a way of it. They could text from a very early age. Okay? But describing these things was that's mostly how they communicated. They carved them onto either a tablet of stone or these pieces of wood. And that very act of creating that mark is sort of a magical act. And I'm pretty sure that's what they had in mind, was they were trying to mark things in a magical way, you know, to signify this is why we're putting this here, because I'm putting the power of that letter, the power of that tree, that power of that body of water right here, or in my pocket, or I'm going to carve a series of these on this piece of wood, and then I'm going to bury it. As it rots, all those powers would bear out, okay? So, since we don't know now what all those myths were, or how they related to all those things. It's up to us to sort of figure out our own way going forward. One way that we can do that, the way that I'm going to talk about now, is by using nature. We do know that almost every one of the 25 letters, the 20 original Omens, and the 5 forfeita or later on Omens, all have a tree, or they talk about the attributes of a tree, or things you would make out of those trees. There are a few exceptions, and there is a lot of controversy about whether or not those exceptions are, you know, how do you answer the riddles? Each one of the Omens has 3 kennings. If you think of the Norse kennings, they have 3 little phrases attached to each one of them. But when you examine them, what they are is riddles. You'll have 3 things that suggest something. They don't give the answer, but they give clues to that answer. For Luis, the 3 kennings: sustenance of cattle, delight of the eye, good for cattle. Well, what are they talking about there? Well, cattle like to eat. This particular tree is good to eat. It has berries that are very nutritious, which keep the cow from getting scurvy. The delight of the eye is basically a fire reference. The berries on this particular plant grow are bright orange when they're mature. So all those things sort of suggest back to that tree. So even the ones that didn't talk about a tree, typically talk about a tree or its attributes. And that's how we can kind of come in and connect. Turn over to page 16. Nature is good, nature is good. That's sort of the basic watchword of the RNDA.
Page 14 in our book.
Is it? Has the pages changed? I have the original copy, so we may be off a little bit on the pages here. But it should say nature is good at the top of your page, okay? What we want to do is, or in the middle of your page, where that part is, that's where this next part starts. Associations that have been created and attached to the Feta can be used to deepen the meanings. By committing these things to memory, we are actively following the footsteps of the Druids. That's basically what they were doing to them. So if you see the Omens, if you're beginning to learn the Omens, and you commit to memory all of these associations, or as many of them as you can handle at any given time, you'll be basically walking in the steps of our ancestors, because that's what they were doing. By journaling and writing about them as you learn them and experiment with them, we're actually moving this beyond their practice probably, because they were not writing them down. That was the last thing that they would do about them. As I mentioned earlier, Feta, or Fid or Feta, means tree, but it is a fiction to say that that's a comprehensive definition of that particular term. What it is the beginning sound or phoneme of the word. Many of them, again, are specific trees or names of things that you would use those trees for. The deepening of the meanings here serves to give us a multivalent meaning. The more associations that you can attach, the more myths that you can draw in to each of these with those, the more multivalent or broader your interpretation is going to become. So how do we do this? Well, we reach out and we make contact with the nature spirits. We learn those nature spirits. We learn to have relationships with those nature spirits. Just as we can have a relationship with a god or a goddess, you can have a relationship with the nature spirit. Okay? You can reach out, you can make offerings, you can establish a relationship with them, you can hug them, you can sit in their energy. There's lots of things you can do. So we'll talk about those and move forward here. One thing that a lot of people have in their yards is a garden. Okay? How many people here have land? Anybody? Okay, anybody doing any gardening on that land? All right. Has anybody thought about the idea that maybe you could bring a few of the own trees into your garden to sort of like have them come live with you, be in a personal relationship with you? That's kind of where I break into the Omens. On my little tiny 1/5 of an acre, I have 19 of the 25 trees or plants that are the Omen grove, the Omen forest, living with me. So on a daily basis, I can walk out and have a conversation with one. And I do. Basically, if I pull it in the morning, I go out and talk to that tree and see, okay, you just gave me new beginnings. What is it that I'm supposed to begin today? And we go out there and see what's going on. Right now, if I walk out to my birch tree, it's covered with little catkins. There are actually new beginnings hanging right on the tree that I can see. Little buds. Catkins is the word for the flower of the birch tree. They're named that, I think, because they look like little cattails. Catkins, miniature cattails. That's exactly what they look like. And they are the flowering buds of this tree. And right now, my tree is just covered with them. A new beginning. Okay. If you looked at the meaning of that tree, it would basically talk about how there's the delight of ease, the grayness of its skin. And again, we're talking about the attributes of the tree. And you can learn those. If you learn that tree, you can actually walk out and experience them. In addition to the trees, though, there are other nature spirits. There's a list of birds that goes along with each one of them. I actively court those birds. I'm trying to bring them to my yard. In my last count, I had 13 of them actually have visited my yard, including when I spent a summer with a big swan. Swan is one of the ones that's a true attribute of the Omens. He even visited my yard, come up, take right out of my hands, and he visited me for probably like 2 weeks every day. I don't know where he went at night, but he came back to my pond every morning, and we had this relationship. We had this developed some time together. It's incredible. I'm also trying to include as many of the Skip's poems. Skip has come up with his own poem system that is evolved around the stones. Does anybody around here work with stones? Are we doing any work with gems and semi-precious and metals and their magical attributes? I'm trying to bring as many of those into my yard as I can. I do have a stone ring in my yard, and I buried underneath those stones most of the attributes that Skip talks about. And I do that just so that those energies, as I'm sitting around that fire inside that stone circle, those energies surround me and I can access them. Have a conversation with them. One-on-one relationships on a daily basis. If you have these things living with you, or if you go out and experience these things, you can have a one-on-one relationship that moves through the wheel of the year. Everything, for the most part, of the northern hemisphere has a beginning, right about now. Flowering period is going to be a plethora of flowers, and there's an order to those flowers. As I walk through my garden, there's sort of an ordering every year as each one of those comes into flower. Usually starts with the crab apple. As I said, the birch tree is already flowering. A little later on, the rowan will flower. Finally, the bay will flower. And I kind of walk through the wheel of the year, experiencing these nature spirits, deepening the meanings as I see them, and I begin to learn their attributes, tie in more and more meaning, more and more contact with that. One of the things that I do every spring is there's a need to fertilize. I take that as an opportunity to give them all offerings. Plants love nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Very good offering to any plant would be something made up of those. I use an organic fertilizer. In the ancient days, people would make shaft deposits for their offerings. You can do that with your trees. You can take and drive a stake down to the ground and then fill that shaft with the fertilizer and actually make an offering to that. As you speak to that tree, as you're communicating with that tree, you can actually bring that tree sustenance and nutrient that will aid that tree and further that relationship. Anytime you can get out there and be with that tree, you're going to deepen that relationship. It's like making friends. You got to get out there. You got to start out by introducing yourself, by learning the tree. You got to further that by continuing that relationship, developing that trust, making ceremonies with these trees, sitting within the energy body of a tree. I don't know if a lot of people know how trees grow, but one of the ways that they grow, or the way that they grow, is as you look at the top of the tree, below the ground, almost on a one-on-one relationship is the roots. So if you walk up to a given tree, you have already entered into the energy body of that tree. If you're underneath its branches, you're standing upon its roots. Your energy body is completely within the energy body of that tree. If you hug it, so much the better, but you're already inside of that tree's energy field. Okay? Those branches, outermost tips of each one of them, that's where their roots grow to. Now, if you're in Ohio, where the soils are made out of pottery like clay, they're not going to be on a one-on-one relationship with the volume. It will be as far as the mass. It'll be just as much root below you as there is tree above you, but it'll be flattened out, sort of like a pancake. But the outermost drip line, they call it the drip line, the outermost branches of the tree are mirrored by the roots. So go and be with your trees. Sit with your trees, join with those trees, be within that energy. As you're meditating in there, you can make that connection. You're going to be inside the energy body of the tree, your energy completely within theirs. Another way that you can connect with it is by having fire ceremonies. Typically on a given tree, there's going to be lots of needs for either collecting up dead wood or pruning out dead wood. You can burn those things, knowing the relationship with them in sacred fire ceremony. The Celts talk about fires of seership made exclusively out of rowan wood. So you can collect up the dead wood from the spring of the rowan tree and bring that into a fire. Burning those things, you're basically release that energy that it's collected. You're now releasing it right there in front of you, using that energy to help you with your ceremony, help you with your honoring. You can also make talismans out of the fruits, pieces of wood, fires of divination that we spoke about just now. One of the things that I've been doing recently is inscribing all of the Omens. As I pull them every day, I pull an Om every day, and I inscribe them on a branch of that tree. I'm using rowan right now. And when I have a full lunar month worth, 28 days, then I burn those in a fire and release that energy. All those Oms that I've pulled, and then release there in that fire. And I'll do fire scrying at that time. My thoughts are that all those Oms are all combining, and they're all being released right before me for one kind of like one big final journal all this stuff. If you don't have a garden of your own, there are gardens around you. I was talking earlier with Charlie, and she mentioned she has been to Dawes Arboretum. It's probably our closest large arboretum to central Ohio. It's out there on the 13, just east of town, about 13, 14 miles. And north of us, probably 5 miles. It's one of the largest arboretums in this area. But we have right here in our own town, Franklin Park Conservatory. We have over the OSU campus, we have Chadwick Arboretum, both major league arboreta that you can go. And if you don't have these plants living with you, you can go and find them in these arboreta and develop relationships with them. The big windstorm that happened a few years ago down at Chadwick took out my friend, the alder. That big windstorm that came whipping around the stadium took out a number of trees in Chadwick, and one of them was my friend. So I had to develop a new relationship with an alder. I don't have an alder living with me, so I've tried to establish a relationship with one. So my friend is now over on 2nd Avenue, just a little bit to the west of High Street. There's a very good sample of that tree. If you're looking for a friend to make, she's a very good one. You can start a relationship with her. But Chadwick, Dawes, Franklin Park, they all have lists of their trees that you can access, and you can find out where those trees are. One of the best ways to do this is probably to go ahead and begin studying the trees of North America. A couple of really good books that I could recommend to you. I'll pass these around to those of you that have cameras. We'll probably capture them at that point. A couple of recommendations for you. Here in Ohio, Trees of Ohio Field Guide by Stan Tekalia and Silby. This is probably one of the best of the visual guides here. This guide, because it's an Ohio reference, is a very good one. is sort of based on the spiritual properties of trees. It's normally a much larger book, but it's available in a pocket version that you can put in your backpack. Pretty handy to have. And this is another very good photographic reference for trees in North America. And you can learn these guys. You can learn them, you know, their habits, their branches, their leaves. When I first started learning trees years ago, it was in the middle of winter. Trees are really hard to learn in the middle of winter, especially the ones that lose leaves. But it can be done. It can be done. And I got to tell you, if you know how to identify the tree without leaves, when it has leaves, it's like walking in the park, literally. This is a good book to help you with that. You often hear people talking about making wands, and they reference some arcane, ceremonial, magical treatise where they suggest that you, in the dark of the moon, with a single stroke of a sickle, strike down your wand material. That's a really bad idea for the tree. I'm going to tell you that. The sickle that you should use if you do feel the need to have a piece of wood from a tree is this sickle right here. Okay? Get yourself a really nice pair of bypass pruners. Avoid the ones that are just have a straight bar here. We call those smash cut pruners because that's what they do. They're basically good for cutting things that are canes or dead anyway at the end of the year, like roses. But you don't want to use those on living trees or things that would go off onto a second year, a third year, a fourth year. So this should be your holy sickle if you are actually needing to take a branch. What branch should you take? Well, if you need to take a branch from a tree, first of all, I think you ought to be making all kinds of sacrifices to that tree. Make them the offerings before you even consider doing that. But if you do feel the need to do that, then take a branch that's going to aid the tree. Take out a crossing branch. Take out a branch that maybe is giving the tree into trouble. Not one that's doing it its most beneficial good. Typically on a tree, you want branches that grow outward, not ones that cross back inside. You don't want water sprouts. So if you need a piece of that tree to work with, make sure you're taking one of those pieces. Well, how do you figure out what are all those terms mean? Get yourself a book on pruning. Anything that you can use for pruning your trees, you can use for keeping yourself out of trouble for that. I have a lot of trees around with me, and they need a lot of care, and so I find that I can get all the wood that I need without ever, taking a piece that's essential to the tree. I just take out the dead wood. Typically, that keeps me in whatever I might need. But get yourself a book on the effective pruning, because the different trees, the different plants, they'll have different needs. Trees that flower this year typically put those buds on last year. So if you cut off the branches right before they flower, you just took all the flowers away for this year. So you need to know which ones are the ones that flower in the spring. Good book on pruning, good book on trees will keep you informed as to what that might be. Another really good book is this one. This is the Audubon Society Field Guide. I like this one because it's got color pictures of both the branches and the bark, and it's good size. Again, it's backpack sized. You can have it in your pocket. That's a good reference book. So any of those would help you learn your trees, learn how to identify them out in the wild. When you're walking the wild, when you're trying to find these trees to make these relationships, these guys will help you do that. Arboretum also have staff. Okay, you can ask questions and get answers. It's a perfect place to find out that information. If you have a grove naturalist, if you belong to an organized grove or whatever, you might have a guy there that can help you out. Inniswood here in town is another great place. It's a metro park here in town for those of you that are out of town. That is also a horticulturally based plant park. And so it's going to have a lot of different plant species in a very compressed area. It developed out of actually a gardener lady's personal property that was then later deeded over to the metro parks. Okay. We all of us live probably in neighborhoods. You can walk down the street. Those trees might not be living in your yard, but maybe down the street there's one that you can strike up a relationship with. Now, obviously, in the case of a neighbor's tree, you don't want to go over there and begin pruning on a neighbor's tree without at least obtaining permission. I would just suggest striking out a relationship with that tree and not doing any kind of work on it without permission. Community gardening. If you don't have the space in your yard, that's another place where you can get and obtain that space to plant these things out, to have these relationships. If you find yourself without any of those accesses, another thing you could do is what I call container nematons. I put one up here on the mantle for us. If you don't have any space, if you're living in an apartment, you've got no green space at all, you could at least have something like that you could set out on your porch. This particular one's a little mound. It's got a little stele, a little miniature stele, and there is actually runes carved on, or Omens carved onto it. So that's one where you could use on your altar space. You need to keep those things outside typically during the summer, but you can bring it in for use during whatever operation or practice that you're conducting. Your bioregion. You should know what your bioregion is. Each one is different. Everybody's got a different watershed. You should do a little research, a little Googling, figure out where your watershed is, where its headwaters are, and develop a relationship with those elements. That river is a creature. It's a complicated creature. It's full of lots of little miniature sub-creatures, fish, birds, bugs, etc. But it's unique just to your locale, and you are part of that locale. So by developing that relationship, you are basically further your understanding of yourself. Okay? You grew up there, you live there, you eat food from there, you are essentially there. Okay? Develop a relationship. Do your homework. Move to that page. The top of it is called Techniques for Learning and Intensifying. Do your homework. It doesn't come easy, but it does come. If you study, if you get out there, if you begin these relationships, you will be able to learn them. I like to use the 3x5 note card system. When you're learning the Omens, one of the ways you can do that is to start out on one side of the card and put down the symbol. Okay? The technical jargon on these is, this little part down here is called a feather. This is the stem line, this line right here. And they're all comprised of, the feather tells you where the bottom of the omen is, because as you can see, this one would look a lot like this one, or look a lot like another one if you had it upside down, right? There's two of them that are exactly, reverses of the others. And if you don't know which way is the bottom to know which way is up, then you might confuse this one, which is Luis or the Rowan, or this one, which is Dewey or the Oak. Okay? So the little feather will keep you out of trouble there. I would begin by just writing down the symbol. In this case, this is Rowan. The word for Rowan is Luis. That's how it's spelled in Old Irish, but probably in English. Okay. And on the back, you can write down the details that you've learned about this tree. I would start by knowing, well, what tree is it? Turns out the Rowan tree here in America is known as the mountain ash. We call it mountain ash here, which gets a lot of people into trouble because they go, well, so it's one of the ashes, right? Well, no, it's not. It's not related to the ash at all. It just looks like an ash because it has a compound leaf. It's what they call pinnate leaf compound. Pinnate leaf is a fancy word that means feathers, feather-like. So there are little tiny leaflets jumping off a main stem with one on the end. Okay, so it looks like a little feather array of little tiny leaves that comprise one actual leaf. They call that a compound leaf. Sorbus aucuparia is the Latinese. Each tree is going to have exactly one Latin name for the most part. There are a few exceptions where people have renamed them after they do a little more genetic research and realized what they thought they had named was not named correctly, and they renamed them. Some of the plants, when I learned them in the 80s, have changed names because now we have genetic science. We can actually see if these plants are genetically related before they just were relying on whether or not they were morphologically related or whether they were related to the way they looked. Okay, now we know a little better. So some of them actually changed names in the last 30 or 40 years. But they will be only one Latin name. You might have a dozen common names. Some of them might be the same. What is called down in the south, one name might be called, another tree might be called that same thing in the north. The one that isn't an elm, but the one that always comes to mind to me is the magnolia. One of them, it's called the tulip tree. Well, the state tree of Kentucky, which is a poplar, is also called the tulip tree. Either which of them is a tulip, but they just happen to have a flower that looks like a tulip, so they're both called tulip tree. The tree that we worship every year that's summer solstice is a type of magnolia. That one's called a cucumber tree. It's not really a cucumber. It just looks like it has little cucumbers for fruits. They're kind of rude, actually. They look like either marmalades or cucumbers. I'll let you decide what you see in the summer solstice. The next thing that I would write down on the card are the three kennings. There are three kennings typically for each Owen, and they are, as I mentioned earlier, the little puzzle pieces that tell you something about that tree. They are the one thing that probably we have best attested in the lore. Again, the lore, as we know it, is secondary information. It's all based on Middle Ages ethnographic conservation of what was being lost. The poets were dying out, the poems were being lost, so these ethnographers in the Middle Ages, in 1390s to 1450, around there, wrote down the Book of Bollywood, wrote down the scholars' primary, which are the two principal secondary sources. We don't really have much in the way of primary sources, except for those stone tablets. That's all that's left from the actual times of the Druids. Okay. So, the next thing I would write down, if I were you, would be some of the associations. What is the key words? What are the birds, rocks, rivers, stones, etc. that are associated with it? I would begin by learning the trees. Okay? They're the most documented. Those others are a lot more UPG, for lack of a better word. And then I would begin by finish off your card by writing down some things on it that might help you identify it next time you walk up to it. You know, is it deciduous or is it an evergreen? What kind of leaves does it have? What kind of flowers does it have? How will I remember it next time I see it? And then you've got this. You know, you can test yourself. You can draw this in a reading and kind of see how much of this you remember, and what you don't remember is right there for you. Okay? That would be the technique I would use as you're learning them. Let's see. Kind of gone through the books and guides. Create a symbol set. There's a couple different things you can, a couple different approaches you can make. The approach that I took, that I would recommend to anybody that has the time, has the desire, has the means, is to obtain the 25 pieces of the 25 different trees that are the Omens. I get a lot better results out of this set because it is the trees that it's supposed to represent than I do any of the other sets that I have. I have a set that's made all entirely out of rowan wood. I get good results out of it. That's a tree that's one of my personal allies, and so it works pretty good for me. But the best readings I find, most clear ones, are when I'm actually holding on to that piece of tree. The oak is a piece of oak. The ash is a piece of ash. The birch is a piece of birch. First of all, it's a visual cue for me because each one is a little bit different. Once you pull them out, they all sort of feel about the same in the bag, but when they come out, you go, oh, well, that's the hazel. So there'll be this visual cue that happens for you. The other thing that I find happens for me is that because each one of them is a little different, they all have a different sound, and that sound kind of becomes like a little song stir them up. They sound a little bit, they sound musical. Much better sound. The rest of them, if you're working with little pieces that are just tablets, they're going to pretty much all sound the same. They sound more like a rustling sound. This one has this one. For me, that's one of my cues that I build into my practice. This sets me into the seer mode when I hear that sound. I know that it's time. My brain knows it's time. I've trained my brain that it's time to then, break out a reading. Okay? The way I did this, well, I determined that I was going to do that. I began with the ones in my yard. I'd already started sort of collecting these trees. I went out and had a ritual with each one of those trees, spoke to it, sat inside of its energy field. I did all my reading, in my books, and I made my little card. And when I felt it was time, I said, hey, I'm going to ask you for a piece of this. Cut out a piece, and I set them aside for a while. I worked every day holding that piece in my hand as I wrote my card down and did my homework. Okay. After a few months, I carved off all the bark, I smoothed it, and then I burned the symbol on it. And I did that at a rate of about 2 trees every month. So it took me about 2 years to go from one end of the Owen forest to the other end. And I didn't do them in order. I started out with the trees that I had already collected, and then I moved on to other relationships. I developed other relationships with other trees, found trees at arborettas, at parks that I could have a relationship with. And it took me about 2 years to go from one end of the forest to the other, building up the set. Now, I wasn't not reading during that whole time. I was working with a card-based system. There's plenty of them out there. I just couldn't do that with these because I didn't have the complete set. It wasn't until I had the complete set that I felt I could actually begin doing readings with this. I didn't really want to have stand-ins, although I have seen people that have done that. They've taken pine or something for all the ones they don't have, and then as they obtain them, they pull out the pine one and replace it with the authentic few. That's another way you can do it. I felt I was just going to wait until I had them all before I started doing readings with this particular set. The last 2 were plants that don't grow here. I could not find anywhere near me and anywhere in my realm of travels the gorse plant, which is we consider it a noxious weed here in this country, so they pretty much try to not let it grow. It's an invasive species. Skip tells me that it grows prolifically out in New York. So I suppose if you lived in upstate Pennsylvania or near New York, you might be able to find some actually growing there for you. It's not a bad looking plant. It's got beautiful little tiny yellow flowers on it. Most of the summer, they used to say about this plant that if it was blooming, you could kiss. It blooms almost all the time, so you can kiss almost all the time if you're gorse aficionado. That was one that I couldn't find, and I couldn't find a heather of any size. Heather is a little twiggy, low-growing mat type of a plant, and has to be really, really old if you're going to have a piece big enough to be anywhere near the size of these other twigs in here. So it wasn't until I went to Ireland that I could find both of these plants. One of them I found growing off to the side of Glendalough, which is a monastery site in Ireland, and the other one I found up in the mountains above Glendalough. Actually, it was kind of looking down on where the Guinness people own their property. They've got a beautiful spread. They own a big spread. And I was staying on the mountain looking at their mansion and their estate, and that's where I found my piece of heather that I could strike a quick relationship with and take a little piece to bring home with me. So it took me 2 years to come up with a set. I think that's not even an aggressive amount of time. You could do it much quicker if you wanted to. I just was kind of really wanting to do it, let everything take its natural time. So, but you could do that. You could develop a relationship like that, and you could come up with a set of trees like this. I know there are people out there, you can buy those sets, where they've actually done all this collecting for you. Most of the ones I've seen are from companies that are operating out of Britain, so you probably have to do a little across the pond kind of postage sort of thing. The next best, or I don't really want to kind of rank these, but another way to do this. Not everybody has that time. Not everybody has that patience. Not everybody thinks that's important in their practice. But the next other way that I would recommend doing it is striking up a relationship with somebody that you can commission a set from. Michael makes some really wonderful sets. Caitlin out on the West Coast makes some really wonderful sets. I'm sure there's other artists too that'd be perfectly willing to make you a set to your specifications. Perhaps in your studies, you will develop a special relationship with a specific type of wood. I have really specific relationships with the oak and with the rowan. That's why my secondary set is made out of rowan. But I'm sure that if you had that sort of relationship, you could talk to Michael and say, hey, I need this set made out of whatever. And he would be able to obtain it. They're very resourceful. And he does it right. I mean, they're prayed over. They're made by hand. 8 hours of sanding, would you say? I'm sure it would take at least that long. He's got a couple, I think your sets here today are actually one of Caitlin's sets.
One of Caitlin's sets, and
But I've seen them, they're beautiful. They're beautiful. That would be a very excellent way to get a relationship going. And I think if you had one that you did have that sort of special relationship with, it's going to have that juice for you. Okay? I think it's all about kind of having that contact, having that relationship. That's what gives it the juice, the mana, the juju.
I also have a set from the Magical Druid, if you guys want to see. So I have the dragon Omens that you had made.
Yeah, she shared those with me. They are really cool in that they're laser engraved on one side and then hand engraved, if I'm not mistaken, on the other side. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. Really cool set. And they're dragons. Who doesn't love dragons?
Did you guys want to see?
Yeah. They're beautiful.
Oh, sorry.
The other way to go is with a more commercial set. Maybe you're just getting started and you think, the best thing for me to do is just start in. And that is a very good way to practice, is just begin making Omens. And I know you have several sets here today that can be done with. No matter what you choose to do, I think the next step you really should take is to do the scribing, the hallowing. Take this set, burn incense with it. Take it around to the trees you do know and put the Om on the tree, Invite a little of that spirit to live in your few, okay? Make those connections, okay? Live with them, sleep with them under your head, Put them underneath your armpit, bring them into your ken, make them yours, okay? No matter whether they're just, cards, or a commercial set, or a commission set, or even your set. The key is to bring them into your practice, okay? Make them real for you. I do think the idea of the return visit after you do have a set is a good one. Take your fuse around on a world tour every once in a while and sort of reintroduce them to the actual living, breathing plant. And go ahead and set them up in the little crotch. Let them live there for a while you talk to the tree. Set them in the roots, rub them on the bark, reintroduce them, get some of that energy in them. Another thing that you can obtain over at the Magical Druid or other places, or you can make one yourself, is this. This is Finn's window. The Lord talks about this. The Book of Valley Moot's got a picture of one. I think it might be in the RSF, I'm not sure.
It's in the book of
So it's probably, so it's in the Valley Moot. And what this is all of the Oms, and they've taken that straight stem line and bent it into a round, okay, and they've placed them all on there. And some interesting things happen when you do that. All the ones line up, all the twos line up, all the 3 strokes line up, all the 4s and all the 5s. And that leaves you with the 5 4 feta, the extra feta. They call them 4 feta because they came along later on. There was 20 Oms for a long time, and until probably the 800s, they were the only ones. But by that point, they'd come into enough contact with other languages that had other phonetic sounds. They needed extra letters to spell out those sounds or to communicate in those sounds. So they came up with an extra 5, they call them the 4 theta. Some people, when they're working with the Oms as a divinatory tool, do not use the 4 theta. I use the 4 theta, there are 5 more trees. Okay? But not everybody does. So other people will take the 4 theta and they'll spread them out onto a casting cloth, and they'll drop a a handful of Omens, either all of them at once, or they'll pick out 3 and drop them, and they'll pick out 9 and drop them. There's various people doing various techniques, and then they'll build up the reading with the meaning of the few combined with where it landed on the clock. Did it land in the region, designated by Phagos? Did it land in the region designated? And they'll add that Ken in there and add that meaning in there. That's another way to do it. But another thing you can do with this, and I think you touched on this, is Ian has given us a wonderful tool. I don't know if he invented it, but I'm going to give him credit for it, is to point to the various ohms and create a sigil line based on that. And you can use that not only for diagrams, but you could use it, as a wand casting if you're making up a spell, or if you're doing some kind of magic work, opening a gate, whatever. You could trace out the shape that's on this by following the path that you would do if you were spelling out a word. Whatever your word of power is, you could use that in your workings, okay? The other thing that I do with it, and this one is a little big for me to do this technique with. I have a much smaller one. I think there's one of them in here. A smaller version of it. And I call it a seer screening. Basically, you can look through this little hole, and you can find some branches of a tree off in the distance, and you've excluded everything except for this small little window. And you look down there and you go, wow, look at that. Right down there, just down there, there is the ohm for the natal, the broom. Okay, so there's a way to find in the natural landscape around you by excluding everything else and just sort of censoring everything else down to this little tiny window. You can find an ohm. You could probably do it with the tile on the floor here if you wanted to, or a stone, or the bark of a branch, or the trees and off in the distance is what I usually use with trees off in the distance. You've eliminated everything else. You find the most prominent branch in there, that becomes your stem line, and then you see how many crossing branches there are and what configuration they're at, and that becomes a few, and that becomes part of a reading for you. Okay? Very effective tool. A lot of times I'll do the reading, whatever I'm going to pull out of my bag, I'll do that reading, and this becomes a bonus reading. I'll just flash it up, and whatever I see off in the distance becomes that ancillary reading or that confirming ohm. Another good way to do that. But as far as those sets are concerned, the best set is the one that you're using. That's the best set. Whatever one you consistently use on a daily basis. I use several in my practice. I'm usually heading out the door and I take a set with me all the time. So oftentimes the first thing I do in the morning is before I get my car is I do the inspirational ohm for the day. And I keep track of those throughout the week. One of the ways that I do it is I'll just draw a line on my sheet of paper, my little notebook, and I'll put the next one on there. Because I already got my stem line going, all I have to do is add my strikes, and I've got my next ohm. And it's interesting when you see a whole line of them on a page ganged up like that, how many times patterns begin to happen. That would be the other technique I would suggest that you do this over time. Make references on your stem line every once in a while so you can keep track of, well, that was Friday's ohm. But you'll see patterns start to develop. More nature deepening techniques. If you don't have a garden full of ohm trees, you could start with just one tree. You could start with just one spot. But pick a spot, either in a park or in your house, and begin to show up there on a regular basis. Some people say, well, what's the best tree to teach me stuff? The one that, and I kind of respond by saying, hey, you can find a martial arts teacher just about anywhere. But if he's in San Francisco and you only get to see him twice a year, the training program is going to be pretty slow. Find that tree that you can find every day if you can. He's on the way to work. He's in your neighborhood. He's in your yard. And go to him and have him be your sensei. And have him be your teacher. The sensei that's going to be the best for you is the one that you can work with on a regular basis. Okay? So find that tree and begin working with them. Make offerings. Create a shrine, even if it's just a little stack of stones or something to designate that this is my spot, This is where I'm going to pour out my libations. This is where I'm going to make my offerings. This is where I'm going to say my prayers. Show up every day and notice what's going on today. What's happening in the world of nature in your sacred spot. Make an inventory of all the plants that you can find in your little spot, in your little area. Make an inventory, make a journal of all the plants and animals that join you. You know, the birds that fly in and out of that spot, the bugs that crawl by while you're sitting there, the ones that drop on your head. Make an inventory, make a journal, and then, you know, look for the patterns in that. Nature scribe, you know. How many times have you heard, well, they told, you know, the divination by the way the birds flew. Well, you can deepen that, you know. If you know that duck is the rowan, and the rowan bird flew by, well, what is that telling you, you know? Now you've got to, you know, what flew from the west to the east? Well, what does that mean? Well, maybe it means one thing, but if it was the rowan tree bird, then it means that plus that, okay? You can deepen your relationship by learning those things. Perform check-ins, reestablish your connection with the trees, and that's what I was talking about earlier about taking your own set around, taking yourself around. You know, maybe your alder tree lives on 2nd Avenue, just a little bit to the left of High Street, but you can go down there and have dinner at the cafe and walk down the street and say hi. You know, find ways to do that. If you haven't seen your tree for a while, maybe it's time to go see that tree. See what's happening with that tree. Is it flowering? Is it leafing? Is it changing colors? Is it dropping branches? Are there bugs eating it? Are there birds flying in? You can tell a lot of things by just being there, being present with it. Journal. Get your guidebooks out. Watch and learn. Observe. Record. That way you can find long-term patterns. Particularly, like if you're doing a major ritual, or you're attending a major ritual, and these omens come out, it's a high day ritual. You go, wow, you know, that we just received this and this and this, you know, and I kind of get what that's supposed to mean, but I'd like to know more. We'll take that and go see those 3 trees. See what's happening with those trees. See what other things are associated with those trees. Check in with them, meditate with them, sit with them, go hug them. You know, people talk about hugging trees and they kind of laugh or it kind of comes up, but you know, you're inside the energy field of that tree, and now you've basically just de-armored yourself. You know, you've made an offering of yourself and your pride, and your ego, and your, you know, maybe your sense of, you know, like decorum. You've sacrificed all that, and now you've hugged that tree. It's beautiful. Those and write them down in your journal. Kind of make reference to them. Deepen that meaning. What does that mean now that you know those extra things? What does that add to what does that add to the high day oracle? Use the Fion screed. If you're at that tree, you know, this is a good time to break out your screed. Gaze up into the branches and see if you can get additional meaning, additional reading from there. If you are creating talismans, jewelry, tools, etc., wear them, use them, break them out, put them on, put them in your hat, put them in your pockets. I like carrying around little pieces of, you know, the trees that I'm working with. I just put them in my pockets. Now I've got a touchstone. I'm out in my, you know, doing my daily thing. I've got a piece of that omen in my pocket. I've got an instant connection with that tree. Perform acts of service. You know, you're out there visiting your tree. You see some trash laying around, you pick it up. Make that an act of service for that tree. You see branches that need picked up, pick them up, put them where they need to be. Take them home with you. Use them in your next fire. Use those things that are, you know, service makes sense if it's something you're doing beyond your daily practice. So make sure that this is something that you wouldn't normally be doing. If you want it to be a sacrifice, it needs to be a sacrifice, right? Make it above what you would normally do. One of the things that I've been doing a lot recently is I see the Theta as little doorways when I'm doing my visualizations. And I'm amazed sometimes at how much it amplifies what happens when I open that Theta in my mind, my eye of vision. When I open it like a little door, it's amazing some of the things, the insights that will occur to me. It's like things come flooding in. So develop that as a practice. Use that. Take and study. You know, we all of us have patron deities, gods and goddesses that we work with. Figure out what plants and animals they are associated with. What does that mean? Okay. How can you use that to amplify your practice and your understanding of these nature spirits? You know, if your goddess is always shown carrying, you know, what's Persephone always had? Daffodil. What does the daffodil mean? How can I relate to that? How can planting daffodils enhance my appreciation of nature? How can I bring those things into my practice? Just about every one of the Indo-European language groups has a world tree. The Norse, I mean, you can just see it's an ash tree. The Celts had several. It's either usually an ash tree or an oak tree. What does your hearth practice? What do they consider to be their world tree? I think the Greeks have a mountain, right? And maybe they don't have a world tree, but they've got a mountain.
Plenty of sacred trees. Plenty of sacred
But they've got plenty of sacred trees. So what do those sacred trees, you know, examine the life history of those sacred trees and what are they, you know, how can you use that to add to your appreciation of nature, to your work with the nature spirits that can tie you into your hearth culture, tie you into your gods, your goddesses, your patrons. And it's another way to kind of deepen that. Explore nature, no matter where you are. You're never not in nature. We are in nature right now. I bet you if we looked around, in one of these corners, we find a spider at the very least. You know, we've got dozens of cardinals flying out here. There's 4 or 5 squirrels running up down this tree. I counted 7 of them right here. I can identify probably 7 different trees from where I'm standing right here. This morning, when we got here this morning, there was a downy woodpecker up on top of one of the trees. It was a shagbark hickory knocking on that tree, waking us up right after dawn. What does that mean? Okay? See that for you? You're never not in nature. You are part of nature. Did you have a? Sorry, do you have a?
No.
Okay. Magical techniques to use with your own favorite. I'm going to renew my UPG disclaimer at this point. These are things that probably I'm using bits of lore to try to work through. So not all of these are going to find in the lore, but there are good techniques. Use the Theta in the manner of bind runes. Take and explore what happens when you take the meanings of 4 things and combine them into a bind rune. Say you're up for a job interview or something, and you need a bind rune that you can take in with you that will do what you need it to do. You need strength. You need eloquence. You need, magical protection. Take the sigils for those 3 trees and combine them together in a single bind rune. One of the things you're going to find.
Well, okay, I'm not sure if I'm clear on exactly. Maybe we just like mush them all together like in a bind room. They're kind of like on top of each other.
Okay.
With this, when you just
When
make
the
a longer
Omens, there's always a
shaft.
stem line.
Yeah, okay.
And say you took the sigil for Rowan and you combined it with the sigil for Oak. Now you've got one thing going this way, one going all the way across, and one going this way, okay?
Oh, okay.
So now you've got a bind room, but what just happened? You took 2 Omens, and now there's the Om that is one going this way, that's birch. You've got the Om that is going all the way across, a singleton, that's Aum, that's the pine. And you've got one that's going off to the left there, that's Huach, that's the hawthorn. In addition to the original 2 that you had, now you have 5 all in one big bind room.
So you are
So-
talking about like really, like literally putting it on top. of each other.
Transpose it right on top, boil it down to the smallest amount of stem lines that you can do, and see what results. A lot of times what you're going to find is it actually amplifies, especially the lower stroke ones, 1s, 2s, and 3s. They're going to make onesies that weren't there before. They're going to make ones that go all the way across that weren't there before. And then some of them are going to make strange shapes. They're going to make X's, all kinds of things. And then if you're allowing for the theta, the 4 theta, in there, you're going to get all kinds of other shapes too, which might also suggest other runes and other poems are going to get combined in there. But that one thing, when it's compressed all the way down, is going to have the powers of all those things that you've invited in there, all in one little compact package. You can then draw that. You could carve that, maybe on another piece of sacred wood. Carve that on a piece of oak to add oak into that equation. Okay? Burn that thing once you've got it done, add fire into that equation.
Okay, I'm just going to be a pain in the butt here. Let's just say you had, I'm going to use the English words because I can say those. If you wanted to do silver fir and gorse, but if you did it like that, you just have heather. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, silver fir is all the way across,
Yeah.
and gorse. But now, if you combine those down, now you've just got gorse again, right?
Yeah.
You combine those
You
two.
put it right on
But
top,
you-
you just have gorse, so
yeah.
you add it, and you have
You
heather.
could add them together in that other way, and you could have heather, and add a third in there.
Okay.
So, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, do you want that extra in there? Is that beneficial to you? Is that helpful in what you're attempting to do?
Okay.
I'm sure similar things happen with the vine runes where you take, Lugos
gotta
and
be
something
careful
else, and you
when you
get
run
Feyu and like that.
You could put it in a room you didn't want at all, just because you're not paying attention, yeah.
Well, yeah, and so what does that do? Well, pay attention so that it doesn't do anything that you don't intend. First of all, would be my first tip for you. Don't have unanticipated ones that you aren't aware of. Combine them in a different pattern if that's the case, because you don't want to invite in something that you don't really want to be working with, right? But take them and either carve them on a piece of wood. Maybe you choose one of the theta to add in another element, or use it to amplify part of your bind rune. Say you want strength in there, so now I'm going to do double strength. I'm going to carve the thing on a piece of oak. Okay. Apparently, what happened to a lot of them was they got buried, because there's none of them around. They all returned to mold, right? Or they were burned. You don't find anywhere any of these staves in wood. You'd think you'd find a few, but you don't. So I'm sort of thinking that what they were doing with them was they were either burying them so that they rotted, putting them in bogs so they floated away, or burned them so that they, joined the all, right? Another thing you can do is you can take the individual twigs that you're hoping to incorporate into your object of power and bundle them together. You can take a piece of oak, you can take a piece of poplar, you can take a piece of heather and bundle them together. Maybe you bundle them together with either material that you've spun up yourself so that your own energy is in there, or maybe you use a piece of leather that corresponds to an animal that you're hoping to work with, a piece of elk, a piece of deer, sacred bull skin, whatever. You can bind it together with something, or maybe you're binding it together with a color that you're adding another color to. So you can bind those three together in a little bundle and come up with a little magical spell, a little magical item, a little talisman of, whatever you're trying to do, a talisman that would represent that. Since you're binding and bundling, now you can start playing with knot magic. Depending on how many knots you knot that up with, maybe that adds to your mojo. The use of the Finn's window to direct wand or hand passes. Thanks, Ian. Use of the kennings and the inscriptions on other objects, that's as old as dirt. Adding in inscriptions onto magical tools to increase their efficacy and to add those powers in there. journal all their experiments and your results. See what happens when you do these things. The ones that work, repeat them. We've got just a few minutes left, so I'm just going to kind of talk about this. It's a nature-based spread. It's based on the world tree. Again, a lot of cultures have a world tree. The way I came up with this is trees, when they are growing, they have a couple of different approaches, but they like redundancy. So they will typically have either opposite or alternate branching habits. And what that means is if the stem is coming up like this, if it's opposite, its buds break out directly across from one another. If it's alternate, they break out, staggered from one another. But they're always going to be one going one way and one going the other way, okay? If the tree needs more light, it's going to want to break to the outside of the tree, away from the stem. If a branch is broken off and it needs to sort of refill in the interior, it's going to break towards the interior of the tree. On the case of an alternately branched trees, usually it's not just in one dimension. Usually they're going around a circle. So they'll be able to pick which direction they want to go to. So when they're going through their long histories, they're going to make choices. Okay, it's next year. It's time for me to grow again. Which way am I going to break? I'm going to break to the outside of the tree like this. I'm going to break to the inside of the tree like this to repair where that branch got taken out by a windstorm or what have you. The tree's going to make choices. Oftentimes it has the idea that it could reverse its choice. I'm not going to break on this bud, I'm just going to break on this bud. But if this one gets destroyed, well, I've got this one as a backup. Well, this spread is kind of based on that principle. The number one few, that's the ground of being. That's where you're starting from. That's the ground this tree is growing in. Okay, what does that theta mean? The number two, that's the main thrust of things. Okay, that's the trunk, as it were, of the tree. Number three and number four are going to be alternate. Which one are you going to pick? Now this one works really good on either sets of views like yours, Christina, where there's a top and a bottom, or on card-based views like maybe the Colin Murray set where it's they look like playing cards and there's a obverse and an active side. So you lay those two down and then you have your query to pick one. Which one do you want? They're going to pick one. You're going to turn that card over. That's the direction that you're going to go. But that one you didn't pick, that's the challenge, or this is the choice you didn't make. This is the thing you want to avoid. Okay? So you move on to the next one, either based on, if you picked 3, your next choice point, your next branching point is going to be 5 or 6, and you just actually won't even pull 7 and 8. Okay? And then you make that same choice again. Which one are you going to choose? Is it going to be 6 or is it going to be 5? 6 is the direction. That's the positive oracle for you. And the one you didn't choose, that's the challenge or the direction you didn't take. And 9, that's the crown of the tree. That's the very top of the tree. That's the one up in the sunlight. That's the one that caps it all. And it will color all those choices you made down below. So you take all those ones down below, and you modify them based on what number 9 says. And so you're basically building up this spread in the same fashion that a tree would be growing out in the wild. Okay? A way to connect nature to your spread. This last page here, just some resources for you. If you need places if you need maps or whatever, descriptions for the parks in Arboretum, there's one. And the last one here is a recommended reading list. If you're looking for books on the Omens, I have about 28 of them in my library. I put the top ones, the ones I think are the best, up here on the top. And if you look very carefully, down there, there's tiny little numbers next to each reference. That's their ranking, okay? I think the numbers made it. Did they go in your set? Are there tiny little numbers? The little number 1, that would be my number 1 pick. That's Roman Lowry's book. I think number 2 is probably Skip's book. Number 3 is Damien McManus. He is the lore master. If it ain't in the archaeology, it ain't in his book. He's probably the one that's got, here's the bare bones of it, this is what we actually know. But the backside of that is, this is just the bare bones of it. This is the only thing that we can actually attest to, so it's pretty spare. It's a very small book, actually. You could read it in probably an afternoon. And another one I do want to kind of point out is this one here, Adam's book. I don't know if any of you guys have had the blessing to meet Adam. He's come to our grove a couple times and we did a thing, a workshop with him. And he's coming back. He's coming back. When is he coming back, Mike? Do you happen to know? It's in April. But he's coming back for another reprise of this workshop. This is a very good book on working with the nature spirits. It's list after list after list of things you can do to bring nature into your life, bring nature seership into your life. And I highly recommend it. And it's self-published, so you'll be helping out him out directly. And this last, I think you already got referenced. That's my keyword sheet. And when I was learning them, what I did basically every day was I wrote down the English letter, the Irish name, I drew the picture of the Om, and I wrote down my keywords, and I kept repeating that process over and over and over again. The first time I'd start at the beginning, I'd write them down to the end. The second time I'd write them at the end, and I'd write them down in reverse order all the way to the beginning. Then I'd write down all the number 1 stroke funds connected together. I'd write down all the number 2s, and you'll be really interested to see what happens when you do that kind of thing. First of all, you're amazingly learning these in an amazingly powerful way, but you'll find these connections between the single strokes, the double strokes, the triple strokes, the quadruple strokes, and the fifth strokes that are another piece of this puzzle. They all sort of line up in amazing kind of ways. It's an interesting experiment to do. Bringing nature into your seership. That's all I got. Anybody got any questions?